Welcome everybody to Frontline Seminar. Today's topic is Manipur, a state in crisis. Now we've seen for the past 19 months, Manipur has been a state torn apart by ethnic violence. The conflict that erupted between the majority Meitei community and the tribal Kuki-Zo uh, that started, I think, on May 3rd, 2023, following a controversial order issued by the Tripura High Court recommending that the Meitei community be given ST status, has so far claimed more than 250 lives and has left more than 60,000 people homeless. We are delighted to have with us Greeshma Kuthar, who was recently awarded the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Woman Media Person for 2024 for her reportage on Manipur. And Greeshma is not just a journalist; she is also a lawyer, and her prime focus is investigating the evolving methods of the RSS. Um, and their use of cultural nationalism regionally and their attempts to assimilate caste identities into the RSS fold. Welcome, Grishna. Uh,
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
shall we start?
Yeah. Let's go
Yeah.
for it.
So we have already, seen 1 month, 1 year, 7 months of this kind of violence. We have seen it, reaching new areas. We have seen it areas that were so long untouched by violence, like Jiribam. We've seen it spreading to those places, and we are getting news of it as you had pointed out much later after the thing has spread. Often the situation is when things are too late, the rest of the country is getting to know of it. Now, how did this situation become so bad? I mean, how did it manage to escalate into this warlike situation? Where did the center and the state go so horribly wrong? Could you just give us a brief background of this?
Yeah, sure, Suhrid. The fact that after the violence started in Manipur, and at the time that the violence started in Manipur, we were all involved with the Karnataka elections. If you remember, 2023 is when the Karnataka state elections were on, and the results were, I think, on the 10th of May, and all of us were very, very involved with figuring out who's coming back into power there. But the violence had started in Manipur on the 3rd of May, and there was barely any reportage on it, right? This was the state of, uh, this was what everybody was, uh, like none of us took note of what's happening in Manipur. Not
Mm,
only did we not take of what's happening in Manipur, there was no real attempt from the state, be it from the Manipur state government or the central government, to flag it as something that has to be immediately addressed. So that's where it starts from. That there was a build up to the violence is an altogether separate question. But after it started, in the days to follow the 3rd of May, or in the weeks to follow, because there was continuing violence, brutal violence, in the first 2 weeks within the capital itself. Lynchings were happening within the capital itself. There were instances of, though the viral video is something that happened on the fringes of Imphal and the Hill district, there were other instances of sexual assault happening within Imphal 2 weeks from May 3rd. So none of these incidents made it to the forefront of any news channel, media channel. That is just one part of the story. The other part is the state government continued to say that we are trying to bring things under control, and this was echoed by the statements of people at the center. So nobody really thought, or maybe that is the design as well, right, to make it seem like nothing's wrong. It was up until, I mean, I was there by the end of May, so up until July, when the viral video, when that video came out, the situation was similar. People were like, something's happening in Manipur, but it's just that it's just another northeast thing, where people just pick up weapons and do what. I mean, those are the kind of conversations that I was hearing before I went to Manipur, and even after I went, when I would speak with different media agencies or individuals or civil society groups in mainland, that's what they would say as well, that we don't know how bad it is, or we don't know whether we need to intervene immediately because there is this happening here, there is that happening there. So the larger problem also is that the response to the situation in Manipur itself was very delayed, right? And I mean, eventually there was a response because of this video, which required people to suddenly be like, oh my God, something bad is happening. And that is because international agencies and everybody else suddenly decided that, okay, we have to speak about Manipur. That is when even national agencies were like, we can't like not talk about Manipur now. That was looked at, that particular incident, even by the statement of the prime minister himself, it was addressed as an instance of gendered violence. It wasn't looked at as ethnic violence. So again, for a couple of weeks it was in the news, and then people forgot. After this, things kind of slow down. I would say after September, October of 2023. When I say slowed down, I just mean that the instances of violence were spread out. But that doesn't mean that the state wasn't burning. It's always been burning. I would just say that Manipur, from the time that the violence started in May, nothing's changed. It's only gotten worse. So the different waves of violence after the 3rd of May in 2023 have had a pattern which were even more, I mean, there would be more violent incidents happening. There would be desecration of bodies. There would be people who would stray off from the buffer zones and go into the other side, who would go missing, or they would be abducted, kidnapped, and then found dead, shot in the head, chopped up. So every wave of violence would be gory, but nobody took notice the way they did with the viral video till this September, when suddenly media channels decided to say that weapons from the US and China are floating into Manipur and they're being used to do a different kind of warfare and all of that, complete exaggeration, again sensationalizing what's happening instead of going into the root of the issue, which by then was inaction and collusion of the state, in complete inaction. It wasn't that these weapons are being used, because weapons have been used in Manipur for a long time. Again, they missed the plot, and now there's been another wave of violence, which is Jiribam. And here again, the thing is that another district gets pulled into the violence, but Jiribam has been burning since June, since I first reported on Jiribam in June. So I would say that there have been consistent patterns since the violence started about how the state has refused to intervene. And on the other hand, say that things are okay, we're bringing it back to normal. And the chief minister would say that I am sending agents to talk peace to all sides. That sort of language, which actually it translates to nothing. Nothing has changed in Manipur. Nothing has been initiated by the central government or by the state government to address this, because this is something new to Manipur. Manipur has had smaller instances of communities going against each other, but it has never escalated this way. The large part of violence in Manipur has been the political demands of the Meitei community against the state, against the Indian state. So the Meiteis going against the Nagas or the Meiteis going against the Cookies hasn't happened at this scale any time in the history of Manipur, right? So how do we address this differently is something that I don't think, I've not seen that kind of initiative from any of the governments, be it the central or the state governments. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know
Now,
what I said.
interestingly, you said something very interesting, that none of the incidents that really was happening really came to the forefront of the. So here we have to talk about the role of the media here. Now, you've talked also in your articles I've read of about the systemic practice of disinformation by the state government through the media, and also also through its own apparatuses, not just the media. So here we want you to share with us some of your own experiences at the ground level, what you saw and what is being reported or not reported, and at the same time, what are the challenges that you faced while exposing some of the atrocities.
Right. So when I landed up in Manipur initially, uh, I realized that my first challenge is going to be as an independent journalist, that by the time I figure out where I'm going to report a particular incident or a particular story that I want to do. By then, there's already a narrative that has been floated by the state or by different groups, setting something that is contrary to the truth as the truth. So, what is the truth? What is the counter truth in reportage is shouldn't be that complicated, right? Because when you're reporting from the ground and when there is already a dearth of ground reports, it shouldn't be that complicated for me to do those reports. But it was because I, by then, though there was no internet in Manipur at the time, and my access was restricted to me going to either a DC office or finding Wi Fi somewhere to understand what's being said. So I figure out a story, I pitch it to different organizations, and by the time I file it, I realize that reputed news agencies have already reported on the basis of wires or whatever sources that they have about a parallel situation. Like I can give you an example, I think, so that I don't confuse people. In September of this is much later. By then, I think people should have figured this out. But in September of 2023, there was a situation where the last remaining town, mixed town, where Meiteis, Cookies, Nagas, they were all like it's like a market, very small market town, I would say. They were still interacting apart from Jiribam, I mean, in the violence affected areas, they were still interacting. They were going to the market together. They had a similar peace committee like in Jiribam, to which had decided that they will not indulge in violence against each other. They'll keep this market town violence free, just to ensure that their properties, because it's a mixed town as well. There were Meitei properties, Kuki properties, Naga properties. So then one fine day, September 8th, I get messages in the morning. I'm in one corner of Manipur, like in one hill district, and I get messages saying that they're burning down this town. Palel, I had visited Palel before in July. And when I had visited Palel, I had seen everybody together. I had seen Meiteis and Cookies together. And this was like at the peak of violence. And still they were going about. So then in September, when I received this message, and I was like, okay, looks like, the reason they're doing this is because they want to separate the communities. So I immediately went to Palel. On my way to Palel, I saw that hundreds of people are walking towards Palel. Palel is actually at the border of a hill district and a valley district, right? And Palel, immediately after Palel, it's fully like tribal villages. So by then, people from those tribal villages adjoining Palel had all fled deep into the hill district. Around 12 villages, 1,500 people had fled. And by the time I reached there, I mean, I'm crossing hundreds of Meiteis walking towards Palel. By the time I reached there, I was told that, and while I'm reaching there, I saw houses being burnt on the way. Any cookie house that was there, it was being burnt on the way. So when I reached there, the town had been cordoned off. The Assam Rifles was on all sides, and I went in. Then I saw inside that people were setting houses on fire. By people, I mean young boys were setting houses on fire. And I thought that this was only about that town. I thought it was just the mob that wanted to burn this place down. But it wasn't. Actually, earlier that day, insurgents, Meitei insurgents again, belonging to different groups, had walked up a hill through a Naga village. They had reached the top of that hill and they had bombed the Kuki villages below. They had opened fire on these villages below, and there were operations against them, and they were cornered to a certain part of the hill district. Like 40 to 50 of these insurgents who were Meitei were cornered to a part of that hill district, and they were they would have either been bumped off by insurgents from the Kuki side, or but that couldn't happen because the Assam Rifles had cornered them there. And the state was aware that this is happening, the state government, and they had sent SOS messages to the valley, right? So this entire thing of burning down Palel was orchestrated to get them out, to get the 40, 50 people out. And how did they get them out? The cops got them out. The Manipur police right in front of me. I didn't know this while I was there. I just thought they're burning down the place. It took me a day to understand that this entire burning down of Palel was orchestrated to create pressure on the government to get them out. And the Manipur police literally escorted them out in front of me, led by the SP of that district. And there were two SPs there, one from the Hill district and the other side. They negotiated with the Kuki insurgent groups and with the army, and then the army the Assam Rifles that had to go against them had to let them pass because these people had fired at the Assam Rifles as well. So I would like to share a video here because I don't want. I mean, this is a video that I got right from the place where this happened. One sec. Okay. So I'm just gonna skip to the. So if I can just explain the video, this is the place.
Yes.
This is a village in the hill district. Okay, this is the hill district, and this particular village was fired at by these insurgents who were on top of the hill adjoining this particular village. So they were basically cornered to the corner of this village, and then this is a cookie village. Then they came back down. You can see them walking out, right? If you look at them, the reason why when they went up the hill they were allowed to go is because they were wearing police commando uniform. They're all, if you see, in camouflage, which looks like the Manipur police uniform. So when they passed by a Naga village, they thought that these are cops. You can see them walking out, right? Now the people assisting them. Okay, now that's a police vehicle. The people around them are the police, and there's another person in a blue t-shirt at the side of this. He's the SP of Tengnopal. So he tells them that don't come back here and sends them off. I mean, that's the video. This is a video that was shot by somebody who saw this, and I was just 100 meters from here while this is happening. I was 100 meters from here recording videos of the mob burning down properties, assuming that this entire thing was about the arson, but it wasn't. So, so the point is, the next day. So this is what happened. All right, and there are 40 people who went into a hill district, and because they bombed this village, 12 to 15 people from 12 to 15 villages fled. 1,200 to 1,350 ish people were displaced. But what do I see on the news the next day? Assam Rifles uses too much force on civilians. Assam Rifles does this. They were, and the CM issues a statement saying that this is what the Assam Rifles did, and we want them to leave, etc. I mean, that a paramilitary or the army or whoever is using excessive force is, of course, a question that can be brought up simultaneously with the fact that this is what happened. By the time by the time I wrote my report and I filed it like 1 week later, 4 5 days later for the caravan, this is the narrative that was floating. Till now, nobody has even acknowledged it on record. There is an FIR that was registered saying these many people came up, but the people who were rescued, I showed you, right, who were taken in those police vehicles, were admitted to a hospital, and close to 9 of them were in the hospital for 8 days after the incident. Not one of them was arrested. Not one of them, one of their names was included in the prosecution of these FIRs. It wasn't even put on record who these people are. And by the time this incident happened, there had been multiple incidents where people dressed up in these fake, they were called decoy cops. By then, the word that was used for these insurgents was decoys. They had gone into different places, shot at people, tried to burn down properties, including government properties, and they weren't reprimanded in any way. They weren't arrested. No, I mean, reprimanded is they weren't arrested, even though they were visible. The only thing that they had to do is flee back into the valley in whatever way. So this is the kind of situation you're dealing with as a journalist, where you're like, yo, this is happening. And then if I have to report about it, by the time I report about it, the state has given another version, and everybody has carried that version. Now, how is it that you report? And this is the instance with anything that happens either in the valley or the hills or wherever. So this kind of misinformation, and even in May of 2023, the only statements that you see in reports are statements that are released by the Manipur government, right? And this is for a while. Even mainstream legacy agencies would also rely only on the journalists from Imphal, who by then were only speaking a narrative which was very similar to that of the state. So even though some of these journalists were very, very celebrated, That they were not doing ground reportage was not a fact that was picked up by many mainstream agencies. I mean, I'm still at a loss to understand why up until July the relevance of ground reports from any of these senior journalists from the valley was not understood, or that they weren't doing it wasn't like picked up, and other journalists didn't intervene. Like, if somebody from Imphal is not giving you a good ground report, then why aren't people sending other journalists from the bureaus in Guwahati or Calcutta or Delhi? Because even when they did, they're reporting some of the ground reports. The only proper ground reports came out of this journalist called Rocky Bus from the Scroll. Beyond that, legacy organizations didn't have such reports. So for me, the larger question when I went in also was that, and even now, it's been 19 months, right? Why haven't we critically looked at the role of journalists, not just in spreading misinformation, disinformation, supporting state narrative, but when something like this happens, not just in Manipur, but some corner of Tamil Nadu or somewhere in Uttar Pradesh, that journalists within that space might align with the state or the state's narrative because of fear or because of whatever it is something that needs to be understood. And Manipur is like a textbook example right now for us to understand this. Because when I went in there, reporting wasn't complicated. Actually, reporting for me from there, other than the risks or threats or whatever you call it, is the only problematic part. Other than that, it's very black and white. Reportage there is not as complicated as, let's say, reporting something my previous reporting stints. In spite of that, if access to the place is the problem, or if your initiative is the problem, then that can be addressed, but it wasn't. So even up until now, even in Jiribam, that people right now, after close to 20 people are killed in the manner that they are killed, it is after this that if you want to send journalists, when instances of arson and killings happen starting from May, then what does that really mean? What does that, when are we going to start asking these critical questions to ourselves, right? Why, even in June, when I started reporting on Jiribam, people would, when I would say that I want to report on this, they would say that, yeah, but this is not that. It's okay. It's just a couple of killings. It's just arson. That's been happening in Manipur all the time. Why? I mean, the fact that those are the kind of responses that I got from editors. It shows that the responsibility of Jiribam becoming what it has become right now is not just on state agencies and the central government, because that by design they want to do this, they want this to continue for whatever reasons, but it's also in journalists who do not want to put the focus on Manipur the way it has to be.
Now, interestingly, you said that by design they want to do this, and they want this thing to be perpetuated, this situation, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a feeling one gets. Now, we cannot also but notice a very blatantly partisan stance of the state government, of the state BJP government, where it is blaming one side more than the other. We're also seeing that there is a kind of a demonization of the Kukizo, and an attempt to label them as outsiders and terrorists. And at the same time, there are statements that are being made, disinformation, and as you said, like, the decoy cops, no arrests. So in this situation, uh, do you think there is a calculated electoral calculation at work here, political electoral calculation at work here, to uh, increase the wedge between the two societies, between the two communities, for for political reasons, for very, very electoral reasons?
The thing about the present chief minister Biren Singh is that he's a turncoat. He's been a turncoat for the longest time. He started with a party called the DRPP, the Democratic Revolutionary People's Party. He was first elected as an MLA, if I'm not wrong, from this party. Then this party merged with the Congress in 2004 or 5. And then he had a stint in the Congress. And then when he felt like he wasn't being given the importance that he wanted, he joined the BJP in 2016. And even when he joined in 2016, it was he's had a very rocky time even as the chief minister, because there were people within BJP who saw him as somebody that they wouldn't support. Even his second term as the chief minister could only happen when he got the support actually from the Kuki MLAs. If the Kuki MLAs hadn't aligned, and also the Naga, a chunk of the Naga MLAs hadn't aligned, he wouldn't have had majority. And that's another criticism that has been kept on the MLAs of the cookie groups, right? Because if you understand how politics works in the hill districts, and in this context, the cookie district, free will to vote is very, very like it's absent, I would say, because most of the Sioux groups, the insurgent groups there, kind of decide who should be elected. So even if there is somebody else who's contesting against you, if you're not endorsed by a so group, the chances of you getting elected is like very minimal. So democratic options for people in hill districts is very limited, and to a large extent these insurgent groups, especially the cookie groups, are problematic in the way that they aligned with Biren almost instantly, right? And I mean, this is how we have to look at it, because these groups align with them because the logic is that the party that is in power at the center usually is what most parties, regional parties or other formations in the northeast align with. But then Biren came with his own baggage of how he worked or what he did. So when you align with somebody like that, then the path that is drawn out for you, because this alliance obviously meant that there was economics, there was all kinds of business deals, because that's how power, especially state institutions, work in Manipur or in most other states. And it also means that there's only so much importance that you're giving your people, right? So the point is that there were different political designs in play already by the time he got his second term, while he also had resistance from his own people, from within the valley. So while this was happening, you see that he is working closely with the cookie groups for a while, and then there seems to be a falling out, and suddenly he starts giving out this narrative of people from the cookie tribes being, using all kinds of terms to refer to them after this fallout, talking about Poppy when he himself has had allegations of being involved in the drug cartels. A very reputed police officer from the community, from the Meitei community that he belongs to, an ex-officer, Brinda, has leveled these allegations of his own role in facilitating this trade. So him to turn around and say that this community is doing this while the trade of drugs in Manipur and in the other districts, by if you look at the reports of the MHA itself, these kind of trades, be it with drugs, with weapons, whatever, has been happening for a while, for more than 2 decades, and everybody is involved. So for him to create this kind of a narrative against a community, calling them illegal, calling them whatever kind of names, that was also to kind of create that polarization within the state. Well, how else can you look at it? That was to create a polarization and also to turn people against each other. And that by design also started happening around the time that he started losing his own popularity. I mean, he was never that popular a leader, but when, like, just 2 weeks before the violence started in Manipur on the 3rd of May, there was a delegation consisting of leaders from all communities who went to Delhi and said, "We don't want Biren, please remove him." And this had happened before as well. There were different delegations that had gone at different points in time to say that Biren is not the right leader. And these delegations were mixed. So for him to kind of divert the attention to this violence, subsequently after the violence started, and to continue talking about the violence, I feel like there is also a big question of why is it that the central government, be it Amit Shah, the home minister or the prime minister, want to keep him in power when he's failing, and when there are people within the state also who are saying that we don't want him to be chief minister. That is a bigger question that has to be addressed. Why is it that they're hell bent on not removing him when everybody seems to say that he should be gone? And also, how is he staying in power irrespective of so many people turning against him? What kind of groups is he using to threaten people? What are his own private militia groups that he has created, like the Arambai Tenggol? What are they doing to stifle dissent? All these questions come up to kind of see how is it that so many months into violence, 19 months into violence, Biren is untouched.
You mentioned Arambai Tenggol, and that's also you did a deep dive into the activities, the essential socio-cultural background of this militia group, and I read that piece in Caravan, and So I want to ask you that by giving Arambai, and recently I think NIA also uh, has started focusing on the activities on the Arambai Tenggol. So what I'm
I mean, they've
asking
been
you is
called for questioning. I don't think they've been
that
mentioned. I don't know how,
I
to
think
what
that
extent. Yeah.
their top leader has been called for questioning, right? But still, there has not been any arrests. There's not been any arrests of members of Arambai Tenggol, and what we're seeing is the government is giving them such a long rope. Now, do you think that this is creating a Frankenstein monster that can, that it will inevitably grow beyond the control of the government and become a force unto itself, a very dangerous force unto itself?
Oh, well, I think it's already become a very big force. But again, it depends on the will of the state to either let them do what they're doing or not let them do what they're doing. And right now, clearly, nobody can question the Arambai. Uh, and when I say question, I don't mean them attacking the community that is on the other side of the buffer zones. I mean attacking their own. There was an deputy SP who was attacked in Imphal, Amit Singh. He is also Meitei. He was attacked because he was investigating claims of extortion by the Arambai. And they went to his house. 200 people went to his house, dragged him out, beat him up, fired shots in the air, fired at him at the house. It became a big thing in February, this February. And nothing happened. The cops, the following days, the Manipur police did like a army investigation. They issued a public statement saying that the senior officers, the IPS officers, issued a public statement saying that these guys are only doing extortion. This is what they are doing. They have a role in the violence. All of that was mentioned in the press release, but nothing happened to them. So Arambai Tenggol is one group. There's also another faction of the UNLF called the Pambai faction, which entered into this very sketchy peace treaty in November of 2023, where the CM and the Home Minister announced that we've done this with UNLF, but it was only a faction. The reason why it's sketchy is because subsequently you'll see a chart sheet of the NIA which says that there was a role that another insurgent group, the Naga NSCNIM, the Naga insurgent group played in bringing insurgents who were Meitei insurgents who were hiding in Myanmar into India, into Manipur, arming them and using them in the violence, right? So what happens here is this is mentioned in the NIA chart sheet, which is filed in Guwahati, and this they say happened in May June. So the NIA chart sheet says this. It says that these insurgents were brought in, and then a few months after, in November, a peace treaty is filed. And in my profile of the Arambai Tenggol, you would have seen that people within their fold, my interactions with them, I was told that the Arambai or the UNLFP is just a front for them for any insurgent from any group to operate and function within the valley right now as a part of this violence. But after the violence, we don't know what they'll turn into. So this is like an open secret in the valley. On the hillside, if you see the established Sioux groups, but by Sioux group you say that they're the reason why I say established is because they have this agreement by way of which the state has acknowledged their presence. Now that they have all these other volunteers who are also armed, working for them or working separately is a different question. But here there's a legitimized body that was given that legitimacy in November, and since they've been like roaming around in QRTs, in these vehicles that look like army vehicles. I have seen them multiple times. I've had people who work in the forces, in the central forces, tell me that when we see them, we give them way because nobody has decided yet. By nobody, I mean state agencies haven't decided yet. How is it that these people are going to be controlled? Where is it that they are going to have camps? What is it that these cadre is going to do? Because the UNLFP openly have been recruiting people, just like the Arambai. They put out like YouTube videos saying, come and join us. And they also give stipends. So, this is how this particular group has been functioning since November openly. Arambai has already been there for a while. And they live stream videos of themselves on different social media platforms saying, we are going into this area, we are attacking, this is what we are doing. There were some videos of desecration that they shared, kind of commending themselves. And then when there is an attack from the Kuki side, let's say, insurgents from the Kuki Zo side attack, then that they are preparing for a counter attack is also live streamed. So that's how it's become in Manipur right now. Everybody is armed to the extent that they can arm themselves. And while you let so see, on the Kuki side, though they are also that armed, they are no longer interacting with the state because they are up against the state. This is not a Meitei, like I've been saying from the beginning, this is not a Meitei Kuki conflict. This is a conflict between the Manipur state government led by Biren and his flunkies against the insurgent groups on the Kuki side and the people, right? So whatever they do, they don't have state legitimacy. But this group, the UNLFP and the Arambai, have state legitimacy. So in Jiribam, when the peace treaty was signed, when it was announced, the UNLFP re-emerged. They fired in the air, and this was told to me by the central forces there. They fired in the air for 30 minutes, this is like celebration. And after that, there would be constant firing from November 2023 up until May, where a Kuki guy is killed. He goes missing and he's killed. Once he's killed, nothing immediately happens. Then within 2 weeks, a Meitei guy is killed. Within an hour, there's disinformation that he was beheaded brutally, etc. And then the Arambai and the UNLF went on like a rampage. They went around burning down houses. They abducted one guy. People fled from that particular area. The Kukizo, Mar fled from that area into Assam. The next day, Mar insurgents went and burnt down a Meitei village. They fled to Jiribam town, and then Jiribam got bifurcated. And following that, the UNLFP and the Arambai, they kind of set up a spot for themselves within Jiribam town. There is a sports university in Jiribam, which is called the headquarters of the Arambai Tenggol, who by then had fired at the Assam Rifles. In the second week of June, while this arson was happening, there's an area called Rani Veng that the Assam Rifles were positioned in because it had a school. So they had positioned themselves around the school. The Arambai had gone up to that school and fired at the Assam Rifles, and they had publicly done it. There was no hiding because this is a town. So by then, the Manipur police and the Assam Rifles had identified these are the boys doing it. They had identified it before, but this happened openly. No action was taken. In the months to follow, in August, in July, August, September, different incidents kept happening there, where by then, from the other side, because the UNLF and the Arambai were doing this, on the other side, on the Kukizo March side, they started coming from different parts and kind of setting up their own spots from which they would take on these people. So that this was created by the state. Who gives legitimacy to these groups? We need to be very clear that this was created by the state is very clear. Then these people started firing, they started going against each other, and then you know what happened this month. So that these groups are like going about in a way that they can do whatever they want right under the nose of the state is clear. Because if these groups are only Meitei groups, then why isn't the state, which is only Meitei right now, the state has taken the form of being only Meitei because only they are functional and only they have the seat of power. If they can't do anything to stop the Kuki side, why aren't they doing anything to stop their own people and such groups? So yeah, there are different political designs, but there is also this legitimacy that is given to people from this side that is kind of creating newer, fresh ground for more such violence. And it's also very strange that every time that something happens against the CM, these groups get active. Again, this has been reported on. Every time there is discussion of his resignation or there is something that is said against him, suddenly there's an incident of violence. This has also been highlighted by particular leaders from the valley as well. Like there's a recent interview of an NPP leader called Yumnam Singh, where he says that the reason for this is the state's inaction. The reason for this is groups such as Arambai Tenggol are going about provoking violence. But his statement has come so late. NPP being there, that they're speaking right now also shows that the opposition parties, NPP was part of BJP up until now. That's a different question. But what are other groups doing? Other political parties? What is the Congress doing? Other than saying Amit Shah, Narendra Modi, what about what's happening in your own state, right? So all of these things also kind of help us draw this uh, this picture of Manipur, that there are different elements that are keeping the violence there in play, and how this violence is being engineered, that pattern hasn't changed. It's the same. Without state collusion or inaction, this is not going to continue. This is not going to, like, continue. Actually, there are different ways of stopping it, but at least there have to be attempts, but I don't see those attempts.
Mhm. Now you talked about the weaponizing of these various insurgent groups, the almost like the it's it's almost frightening. It's very frightening, the kind of weapons that are that are ceaselessly coming into their. There seems to be a never-ending supply of it. Now, there are these reports that these are essentially got from raiding armories of the state armories and army armories. But is there another place from which these weapons are being supplied?
So, like I wrote in one of my pieces for the Frontline only, weapons are not new to Manipur. Weapons are not new to Manipur or to insurgent groups in the northeast. They have their set ways of getting weapons, and this is from like the time that insurgency started in Manipur. How is it that they went from Myanmar to China, to particular interacted with particular groups in China, also particular groups in Myanmar, and by groups I mean initially it started off. Cookies joined this insurgency and accessing Myanmar for weapons much later. Meiteis and Nagas are the ones who started first, right? And it was also that time their political vision and how it is that they kept that political vision alive, along with weapons, is something that has been kind of reported by different state agencies as well, where it is that they're getting their weapons from. Because such there have been particular instances when they're bringing weapons into India, they've been intercepted. Those weapons have been sort of these people have been apprehended. Those weapons have been taken away from them, and then it was clear where the weapons came from. There have been instances where leaders of the UNLF or PLA were arrested by authorities in Myanmar, and then they were subsequently released after certain negotiations by groups here, again all under the table negotiations. So weapons have been coming into Manipur at different points in time, from like decades, up until there was a push against insurgency in the 2000s. In the 2000s, there was a push against insurgency, particularly the Meitei insurgent groups, where they were all pushed back, and also a lot of many of them, there are all kinds of extrajudicial killings, different forms of violence happened in those 10 years. And subsequently, as they were pushed back, they formed their camps, and many Meitei insurgent groups formed their camps in Myanmar. Similarly, the Naga groups and the Kuki groups, with their existence, Kuki groups more recently, also had, because of the fact that they all they share ethnic ties with people in Myanmar as well, also had these connections, by way of which they also had spots where they would set up camp on the other side. By then they were in a Sioux agreement, so their circumstances were different as compared to the Meitei insurgent groups, which weren't. They were just like, they are banned groups, right? But I have had interactions with people who said that before the war started, Naga, Kuki, and Meitei groups who are on the side of Myanmar would all procure weapons in a similar fashion. The agents from whom they would get weapons would be the same. One of the groups, like let's say IM, would give weapons to both, or another group would give weapons to the other two. So they were in talking terms, even though they might have skirmishes within themselves. They were in talking terms when it comes to business, be it weapons, be it drugs, be it whatever else that they dealt with. It was at the start of the civil war in Myanmar that things complicated, right? Because people had to take sides. Eventually, right now, certain groups within India as well have taken sides. Like there are certain groups that have sided with the junta in Myanmar, and certain who have sided with the factions, the ethnic factions within the PDFs, the People's Democratic Forces. There are different such groups. So all of these combinations also kind of work out on how weapons come in this side. But the point is, they did not I mean, first of all, US and China giving weapons to factions in Manipur is hilarious, because the fact that they would allege that these two groups are coming together to work here itself is ridiculous. But beyond that, people, the insurgent groups here, the factions here, whichever group that they're working from. They don't need help from elsewhere. These are roots that have existed for a while, beyond India. There are different trade routes that have existed for a while, and by that I mean weapons trade routes. So to procure weapons, initially it was through the armories for on the Meitei side, because on the cookies, many of the major armories are in the valley. Smaller armories which are in the hill districts were also ransacked by the cookies, whichever they can, but they were very small in number. The largest chunk of it was in the valley, which the Meitei groups, especially the Arambai and the other groups, got. Eventually, over a period of time, everybody has started procuring, because ammunition is going to run out. Though they were able to access lakhs of ammunition, it is still going to run out. So over a period of time, everybody has had their way. It's clear, because every wave of violence comes with that kind of gunpowder, right? So that they have procured weapons, they have improvised on weapons. All of these things is something that we can take. It doesn't require that much of common sense to understand. That's a given. What their channels are also is a given. It's coming from either across the border. Some of the weapons, for instance, that some of the mortars, that were some of the bombs that were fired, even to now, even till date, have like markings that they are weapons that have been taken from the government. The ammunition has the markings. So these weapons are also in circulation. Newer weapons are coming in. People are figuring out how to procure weapons in whatever way. So there's no dearth of weapons in any side, on either side.
Now let's talk
But if
about.
I can intervene here, if I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
intervene
sure.
here, because this is where we need to understand what the role of the security forces are, right? Be the
Mm-hmm,
state
mm-hmm,
forces or the central forces. Now, if in the hill districts, the central forces, because the hill districts have always had AFSPA, that has been
mm-hmm,
taken on, that hasn't been taken away from the hill districts
mm-hmm,
during this violence. Now, again, AFSPA has been there in Manipur at different. I mean, it has from the 80s, the time that it started. In the valley, it was to control the Meiteis, the Meitei insurgent groups. AFSPA was in place where the insurgent groups were going against the state. So it was to control the insurgent groups who, at that time, as as the security forces started pushing back, starting from the late 90s, they started going into the hill districts to hide. Their allies in hiding were actually tribal groups. Tribals were helping the Meitei insurgent groups hide. So that is when the central forces go into, especially the Assam rifles, go into the hills to look for these insurgent groups, while also controlling the insurgent groups from the Naga side or the Kuki side. So every time AFSPA has been used, it has been state against a particular community's insurgent groups. This is the time for the, again, there have been small skirmishes which have escalated also. There was this thing when the assembly was burned down after the ceasefire agreement with the IM, but it never escalated beyond a few days or a week, right? This is the first time where there is a proper civil war and there are two sides. And now, how will you use the AFSPA is the question. Where one side there is AFSPA, other side there isn't, which means what? There is different systems in place. On the hillside, the central forces have control, so-called control. On the valley side, state forces have control. By now, the state forces have been split up communally. Meitei police officers are on this side, Kuki police officers are on this side. There have been reports about how they have been used communally by the state government. So now you have two forces. You have the Assam Rifles functioning in certain parts. You have the CRPF and BSF under the SP of that district operating in certain parts, and them disagreeing on how we should deal with a particular situation in certain parts. In Jiribam, that's what happened. In Jiribam town, there was no AFSPA. So I saw like UNLFP and AT roaming around after knowing that these people had fired at the Assam Rifles, and the Assam Rifles were saying we can't do anything against them. And the state forces refused to arrest them or do anything against them. It's only now that the Manipur police is saying, after the killing of that Mar lady, that this was provocation, because subsequently after that 10 people were killed, then 6 Meiteis were abducted,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
again they were found floating. So all of this happened because these groups were festering and like, operating in a faction which didn't have AFSPA.
Mm-hmm.
So was this difference in, the way in which forces function used to further
Mm-hmm.
escalate, to further add to the violence? And if that
So,
was, and this was understood right in the beginning, in May itself
mm-hmm.
this was understood.
Hmm.
Why was there no political will coming from the central government or any kind of directions from the MHA to
Hmm.
address this? Because this was flagged, all most senior security officers from the army, from the Assam Rifles told me that they have been flagging this from May, and they just say we are helpless. Now, I don't
Hmm.
buy into that. But the thing is, even if right now AFSPA has been reimposed in 6 police stations, they're saying, even then, unless there's political will to address the situation, it's not going to change. Nothing's going to change.
So as you had said, like the reimposition of AFSPA after a gap of 2 years in these five districts and six police stations, it's a it's more like a political gimmick to make it look as though the state is being proactive in trying to curb the violence to bring things under control. But like, what
Yeah.
is AFSPA going to do now? What can it do?
I mean, honestly, AFSPA has had a very troubling history, right, of the way it has been used. It's only
Exactly.
been
Yeah.
associated with human rights violations,
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
which has been flagged by multiple people within Imphal itself, within Manipur itself. So, how will that be used is a question that I don't, I mean, in this is a different situation as opposed to,
Mhm.
like I explained, this is very different from the previous instances of violence and, counterinsurgency operations in Manipur. This right now is a civil war. Again, I would say that I wouldn't call it a Meitei cookie war like everybody calls it. There is a very strong role of the state government in initiating, in driving people apart and keeping that fissures in place to kind of keep it apart. But coming to the role of AFSPA, like I've already told you, there are certain parts, like in the hill districts where the central forces are supposed to be doing XYZ things. And in the valley, it's the Manipur police. Even within the hill districts where the Manipur police are, there have been certain parts that have now been given to the police to kind of ensure that violence doesn't happen there, which means the CRPF and the BSF is functioning there. And they get their orders from the SP. The Assam Rifles are an independent body. So, what will happen when you have to do something together? Because there have been clashes between them. They don't see eye to eye in certain situations. Even the Assam Rifles, which is supposed to have independent will not do anything when they are told not to do something by the chief minister or by the home minister. So, where is the one? If there has to be clear political will to stop the violence, it needs to come from up above. And we have seen on multiple occasions that that isn't happening. When you know what happened in Kangla Fort, right, where the Arambai Tenggol summoned all the legislators and they were made to do something which again was orchestrated to give Biren more power. It was not like the Arambai is the only. It was a political gimmick again. When that happened, what did the NIA, what did the interlocutor, what did all of them do? They had conversations with the Arambai, and the people who were against Biren from the valley, they were beaten up. Raghumani, who is an MLA, there are different versions that are floated about him, but he was one of the people who, before the violence started, went to Delhi and said, "Please remove Biren." He was beaten up there. So all the four again, the Arambai is coming from different directions into Kangla, right? Into the fort. The central forces who were there up until the morning, everybody fell back. They just disappeared from there. How did that happen? So it's not just there. Even in the hills, the way in which they function is very different from the way in which the forces function in the valley. Even in the spaces where AFSPA has been reimposed, there have been different times where in particular places there are insurgents who were apprehended. They had to be released because the mobs would come there in those numbers. And this has happened only in the valley. There have been instances where insurgents associated with certain incidents were rounded up in the hills by the central forces and they were arrested. There are only a couple of people who were arrested in the valley, and in one instance the magistrate court was bombarded by the mob, and in a case where there is UAPA, bail was given. How many instances do we know where in FIRs where there is UAPA, bail is given? But it happened in Imphal. Except one guy who was rearrested later, all five were given bail. This happens when there are people languishing, students and lawyers and who not languishing in jails because of UAPA. This happened in Imphal. So what it is that AFSPA will do, I don't know, because I don't think anything will change until there is clear political will, and that political will has to act against the present chief minister. Otherwise, I don't see anything changing.
Now, can we talk about the immediate precipitant of this conflict? We see the Meitei community's demand for a tribal status, and the High Court's rather misjudged, controversial order of 2023. Now, Manipur we see is kind of unique in that the the ST status is intrinsically linked more with the control of land than with other issues like jobs, etc. When it comes to other states, though there is also the question of adequate representation. Now, what I'm talking about here is that while the majority Métis have around 10% of the land, the minority tribes have about 90%. And this brings to the fore certain bigger, complex, and unaddressed questions, right? That have links to constitutional provisions, that have links to the sixth schedule, as we discussed earlier. And could you talk about this? Could you talk about this socio-political imbroglio that Manipur is in right now, and this issue of land and the sixth schedule
Right.
with regard to Manipur specifically?
Again, very, very complicated question, but I'm going to
Yes,
try and
sorry about
bring it down to 3 points.
that.
First point is there are already documents that exist about Meiteis being, that they should be included in under a schedule and be declared as tribes has already been, the process has already been initiated by the central government. There have been like the Hindu Abhinay Lakshman. He had after applying for these documents through RTI, he did a report where the responses of the government saying that such a request was rejected twice by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and then subsequently by the state government. The Manipur state government was asked by the Ministry of Social Welfare, Ministry of Social Justice, if such an inclusion should happen. And the tribal department in the Manipur state government responded, agreeing with the 1981 response of the central government, saying, of the department, saying that Meiteis don't meet the requirements required for being accorded this status, which is the Lokur committee has these guidelines that they have set: tribal characteristics, exclusion, geographical isolation. All these things do not apply to this community. So the Manipur government has rejected this when they were asked, and so has the central government. So it's not like this question hasn't been discussed before. It's not like, and even this High Court order, subsequently the Supreme Court made them resign that portion. So the cause of this violence that we are all talking about no longer exists in paper. It's been removed. But then we are not talking about this thing about ST inclusion and what it means for this community, where people have already said that, I mean, institutions have already said that y'all don't qualify, right? That brings us to the larger question of how is it that like asking for ST, SC, OBC, all these statuses, right? What is the basis of these requests? How can you make a request like this? What should be the response of the state to such requests? And are these requests, the responses to these requests, only political in nature? Because randomly any community can't get up and say we want this status because of XYZ reasons. There has to be there are clear guidelines which again haven't been followed for a long time. That's a failure of state institutions, and also the political ploy with which this has been used to kind of create support or to kind of create some kind of lobby for particular leaders themselves. So it has to be looked at with that lens as well. But coming to the question of um, cultural, I mean, this is something that has been a question that I flagged in my first report for about the violence itself. But if the characteristics of that society itself has to be looked at, like Meiteis say that they used to follow indigenous religion called Sanamahism back in the day, and after a Brahmin evangelist, so to say, I mean somebody who came in and converted them 2.5 centuries back, where the state adopted the religion of Hinduism, Vaishnavite form of Hinduism, and they were forced to convert, force or by choice or whatever it is, convert to this religion. And then they associate, even in that particular response of the State Department, it says they associate with Kshatriya caste, right? Even the Arambai Tenggol, in all their slogans, they call themselves warrior blood. So it's all coming from the same language. But the point that I would like to kind of push people to think towards is, so when this guy comes in, this Brahmin guy comes in and he converts people in the valley, in Kangle Park, what are the kingdom of the Meiteis. If Manipur, even before the British or whatever happened, included the hill districts within their ambit, which is what they're saying right now, how come the people in the hill districts, the tribals, weren't converted to this religion? How come their religion remained their own religion till the 1800s, late 1800s, where they started adopting Christianity after the coming of different Christian missionaries? This is also for us to think about culturally how these communities have been separate, right? Because when you look at exclusion, all these things come into the picture. So for the hill districts, which have formed, which have completely followed a different kind of a cultural, uh, uh, separate cultural religions itself, a separate religion which kind of gives space for different cultural forms to exist there. This question needs, we need to look very closely about this as well, because if this part, which is, which is a kingdom, converted to Hinduism, why didn't the others? And that also kind of ties in into how eventually this group looked at them, right? Because by then there were certain traits that came into that society to look at their own practices. There were certain parts of meat eating that was looked down upon. People within them who refused to convert to this religion were pushed to the corners. They were also excluded. They eventually were called particular names, and they eventually went on to get SC reservation because they were excluded. So different things have gone into play into understanding that society, which also kind of gives us an understanding of how that society functioned before, constitutional processes came into place, and what that conversion to Hinduism, or subsequently associating with different British agencies, institutions, what access it gave them to institutions that came subsequently after independence. All of these things come into play. We don't talk about these things because in reportage, what was there culturally is something that doesn't at all come into play. But I tried to flag this for us to just think further. Though there is already documents that say that ST reservation has been rejected by them, how these communities have existed against each other is also important. Finally, it's only Manipur that doesn't fall on the sixth schedule in all of the Northeast. Under particular Article 371C of the Constitution, their ADCs, that is Autonomous District Councils, do not have as much autonomy as the rest of the hill district councils, ADCs, and the other hill districts. Now, this is also something that the tribes of Manipur in the hill districts, be the Nagas or the Kukis, have been talking for a long time, because of this lack of autonomy. Since they're not part of sixth schedule, most of the decisions in these hill districts are also made by the state, unlike other ADCs in other hill districts of the Northeast. So that they have also been against what they call state control, control of another community on what happens in their hill districts, again, hasn't been reflected on a lot in during this violence. But it also ties into the question that this particular part, because they are resisting state control but also keeping their own people, like within the hill districts, how it is that the insurgent groups control those districts, use whatever state resources to kind of grow, but not let infrastructure in those districts grow, is also another criticism that has been floated by civil society, tribal civil society. There are so many more layers to this when we talk about ST, or how it is that these regions function, and what are the flaws that exist already, irrespective of whether there is ST or not. So reservation, again, the point of reservation is not access, is to be viewed as, it is just because they don't have so much land, or it's because they want access to land. I mean, the point of reservation is also to kind of neutralize the control that particular communities have on state institutions, right? That's the point of reservation, that in certain offices, that in these spaces, that those spaces, all kinds of communities should have like equal representation. That's the point of reservation. Now, if we were to look at how it is that state and who works in state institutions, or who is in majority of the state institutions in Manipur, we would know the answer to this. The tribal groups say that it's the Meiteis who control most of the state institutions. Now, if that is a question mark, then a census can be done to understand that. But it till, I mean, look at the assembly, look at most of the way, look at the way in which the violence has, the way in which central government uh, has dealt with this violence. They've only been pandering to the narrative of the CM. That he has not been removed itself shows us that there are certain, again, even within Manipur, even within the valley, the way in which the Meitei community itself is suffering, you'll not find a lot of reportage about that as well. Initially, when the Arambai Tenggol targeted cookies in different parts, they were also targeting Meitei Christians. In the 2 days that the violence happened in a widespread kind of a way on the third and fourth, they also attacked and burned down majority of the Meitei churches in the valley. They attacked Meitei Christians. They made them sign affidavits saying that we will convert from Christianity to Sanamahism, and many of them fled. And journalists who were there subsequently were told by people there not to report on this. Till now, the reportage on what has happened to Meitei Christians is like barely one report I have filed, couple of others have filed. There's hardly any reportage about this. Eventually, even right now, the kind of extortion that's happening across Manipur, be it in the hills or in the valley, is crazy. But the reportage, which means all communities are affected, but the reportage on it is missing because of the kind of fear that these groups have put into place. So for us to kind of look at the macro picture of it, it is that whatever narrative is there about ST status, or that this community is not benefiting from this or that, has come from a certain kind of manipulation. That's been my observation.
But talking about the center's attitude, we must take note of the fact that after one year 7 months, the prime minister has not visited Manipur once, and this is something that is being felt uh, quite acutely, not just by the tribal population but also by the Meitei community, that this feeling of being neglected. So does this not further feed the seditionist forces, this kind of an attitude?
Sure, it does. Already there is a attitude that people have when you talk about intervention of the state, right? Because that intervention, in this particular case itself, in this particular instance as well, that is following the violence, that the response has been delayed is a criticism that's coming from different groups, but also that it has not been well thought out, that it has not been anything beyond like gimmicks, or just saying we sent extra forces, or there are peace initiatives going on. Beyond this, the real an actual attempt to kind of address this hasn't happened, and that's also because BJP is at Delhi and at Imphal. Like, they are operating out of both places, and there's a certain way in which they want to protect their own as well. For whatever it is, they don't want to show like BJP has failed in Manipur, right? Because after the sweep that they've had in the northeast, they want to show that we know what we are doing, though they clearly don't. They want to pretend like, irrespective of the violence, that they want to continue to control Manipur, because there are also different policies that they want to put in place. Again, all associated with Myanmar, certain projects that are developing on the basis of this look east policy. So they also want to control the region. They don't want to let go of the region, but they don't want to like address this violence, because controlling that region means that they have to operate with people from all communities. So they are playing it in a way that they don't lose favor with any of the communities, but they're also like not distancing themselves from somebody who is a troublemaker, who has created and strengthened the rift in ways that we see almost every month. And it is also clear that them being this way is absolutely fine, because civil society in rest of India as well has not been civil society opposition parties. I mean, the opposition really like tried to use Manipur as a peg for them during the election. But beyond that, what has civil society really done to kind of say that, you know what, this is happening in Manipur? How is it that we address that? How do we consistently address it? Civil society groups, organizations, media agencies. There is a lot of talk about, and for good reason, talk about what's happening in Gaza. But even the civil society groups that have kind of mobilized around that before the war started in Gaza in October, they weren't that active about. Even now, there is a certain way in which the violence in Manipur is addressed. There is this thing that it's like that because there are too many groups, it's complicated, or there's nothing that can be done. There is this assumption that we can't figure it out, or it's complicated so we won't talk about it, from civil society groups as well. So I agree that we are at a juncture right now that irrespective of what we do, the central government will have its way in, kind of taking forward its partisan, communal, casteist, whatever behavior. But where is the conversation and where is the talk, whatever is required about what's happening in Manipur? If not for that video, I can completely assure you that the coverage that Manipur has got would have probably been not even 10% of that. I know it because I was even cases of like that this happened to these two women aren't the only cases that require attention. There are so many such other instances of some, like from the initial days that I was trying to report in June that people weren't interested in. It's only that certain kind of voyeuristic gore that kind of pushes people to also like pick it up, and that also disappears. So that the central government has been like, useless, is because opposition parties, civil society has also been not relatively, completely, I would say. Talking about it once in a while doesn't really help anything, right? Unless you're constantly like making this a point of your, making this a uh, regularly talking about this, it's not going to really like put any kind of pressure on the central government. Like if farmers protest, see, again, the instances are completely different. But eventually, if the laws were repealed, there was a certain design in which those protests happened. Again, there's a very powerful groups itself, let's say. But that kind of that kind of a mobilization cannot happen in this part, let's say. But what about the rest of India? If it's not happening in Manipur, what about I mean, this has actually been the question that's been plaguing me more than anything else. That an entire bureaucrat, I mean, there are so many bureaucrats who are there in Manipur in different parts, right? What were they doing when this violence happened? Why hasn't a commission looked into their role? Were they quiet? Did they listen to instructions to tell them to be quiet? What is it? When will they be questioned about what they saw? What about journalists who did not report for months, for weeks, and let this thing fester? All of these questions kind of come into my head right now as well. It's all tied in, and all of these things have allowed this lack of accountability that has remained for all these different players, has also allowed the state government and the central government be completely unaccountable. So that's where we are at. If they are doing this, it's because there are different others also who've let them take on that weapon and that veil of being unaccountable.
Now, Grishma, this was so fascinating. I didn't even realize that 1 hour 14 minutes has elapsed since we started this conversation. But I would like to end this with just one more question. That is, can you talk about the peace building process? The initiatives, like what needs to be done right now? Because there are cookie, as you pointed out, there are cookie MLAs in the BJP. So why is it not possible for the state government to bring the two communities to the table?
The state government is not going to. I mean, they've been saying that they are having co- peace talks or conversations, but that is a lie. Even something that they orchestrated in Jiribam was blatantly like, I would call bullshit, because It did not happen. Literally, when the CM announced in the assembly that this is happening, there was violence happening there. On that day, I was in a particular area, Meitei area, where the Meitei women, all of them were packing up and leaving, saying that we will be attacked anytime. You know, so subsequently there were such incidents. Like, if everybody is only looking at peace as a gimmick, like if the CM is looking at taking up the word of peace as a gimmick for him to stay in power, which it has been become clear by now, then then the answer is obvious. No, it's a gimmick. They are not really doing much. From the cookie side, they're saying that unless the CM goes, we won't negotiate. We won't come to the to the negotiating table. From the Meitei side, they're saying unless the Sioux agreement is removed, all the insurgents are declared as whatever they are declared as banned groups. We won't come to the negotiating table. But if these groups are deciding this, then what is the state deciding? And by the state, I don't mean the state, the center. What is the MHA deciding? The MHA is still saying people on both sides are provoking violence, so we are looking at it, we are sending more forces. This is, if this is a unique situation according to them, and it is unprecedented in their tenure of governance, then it has to be dealt with in that way, right? They have to think about something to bring them together. There was the MP, there is a Naga MP, there are two MPs, right? One is Bimol, and there's the Naga MP from the outer constituency. The MLA Alfred, sorry, the MP Alfred, he said, while he was being told to take a position, he said, bring my community as a negotiating community, bring us in a way where we can be completely like used to bring both parties together. I will here say that we will figure out a way to bring them in, though at that point the insurgent group of the Nagas, NSC and IM, was turning against the cookies. He said, I will ensure that this will happen. This is something that he told the governor, and he's also mentioned this in the parliament. He said, make us the peace people who bring peace, use us in whatever way required, let senior leaders be given the option of doing this. I mean, as a person from the opposition party and also as a person from the third community, that's the Nagas, he said this, but nobody took him seriously. Such comments or such offers for help are not really taken seriously, I guess, because nothing has been done. The Nagas are being pushed to take a stand either on this side or that side, but again, who is this? Who is the stakeholder when it comes to state institutions? Who is holding power? They are the ones who eventually end up deciding what can be done and what will be done, right? So they can make whatever statements they want. We are doing this, we are doing that. But the fact remains that while so many people remain displaced, so many people continue to suffer in relief camps, there's only so much attention that is being given to people who are victims of the violence, direct victims of the violence, be it on this side or that side. People who have lost their homes, people who have lost family. The biggest worry also for me is looking at young people of Manipur. Like on the tribal side, many of them are first generation graduates. Some of them are second generation graduates who are able to now decide that, okay, I can go into UPSC, beyond like just looking at it as something that is the only option, but also like somebody who wants to take up that position and come back and serve in society, and kind of change over their districts. There are people who are literally, who have been able to go to college while they were working by themselves, first generation teachers, first generation graduates, who have all now taken up, either some of them have taken up weapons, others are in relief camps, which means they've been set back by that many years. That's on all sides, right? So how is it that, why is it that the urgency of the situation, even if the affected people are like 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs, when it comes to the displaced people are around 70-80,000, apart from the people who are in the camps and people who are outside. But even people who are directly in these buffer zones, even if the numbers are not something big for India to take notice, it is big. My point is, the thing that has been said, it's a small pocket, small population, but the fact that these many young people are going into, are either picking up arms or like are losing their confidence in in the state of in the government, and are saying that the only way for us is to pick up weapons. It's not just troubling, it's horrifying. This is that their voices, that these people are being affected this way is again not being centered. To create urgency for the government to act is also an issue.
Well, that was really a wonderful talk. It was fascinating. Thank you so much, Grishma. I think we should wrap up now because our time's up. But that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks to Frontline as well